Hello fellow knitters, welcome to my charts workshop. I've decided to do this workshop because a lot of people ask me about charts and how they've always seen a chart but never used a chart or never understood a chart. They always use the written instructions. I've divided this workshop into two separate videos. This first video is for beginners, so individuals who have never seen or worked from a chart before. The other video is an advanced video, and it incorporates some other things that you can do with charts in that video. This video is designed to help you have a better understanding of what a chart is, the components of a chart, and how to actually read a chart. So a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, if you look in the description section for this video, I did put in a table of contents for this video that allows you to jump to specific sections of interest that I talk about throughout this video workshop. The other thing too is in the description section you will find the link where you can view and print this chart that I've created for this video. So this is the chart that I'll be using to demonstrate how to read a chart as well as knit from a chart. It is a PDF format, and again it will print out on your personal printer exactly as is seen here. Now, I did divide the chart into two sections. This is more or less the chart that you would see in a typical pattern. This right here is to accompany this video in helping you to better understand where I am in the chart. In other words, what particular row I'm on, which direction I'm reading the pattern or the chart, and there will be a screen overlay when we actually get into knitting the swatch. And the screen overlay will be in the upper left corner of the video. It will not obscure what I'm actually doing and demonstrating, but it's just a visual aid to show you exactly where we are in the pattern, and you should be able to actually knit along in this workshop as we cover this particular pattern. Now, the other things that you will need for this, to do this swatch, you'll need a knitting needle of some sort. This is a circular needle. You don't have to use it. You can use just straight needles, but I have an entire set of circular needles, and this is my favorite set, and I use them for everything, whether I'm knitting in the round or flat knitting, it doesn't matter. I bought these at a local yarn shop, but you can also buy them online. Now for this you'll need some scrap wool. Again, this is just a swatch that we're doing just to follow along. So just a small scrap ball that you might have. This is some Cascade Superwash worsted weight that I had left over from a different project. So I'll be using this for this particular workshop. Now the needle size, if you're interested, I am using a US 5, which is also a 3.75 millimeter needle. And if you use that needle size with any worsted weight yarn or wool, it should look pretty much the same. The first thing that I want to talk about with regard to charts is the anatomy and everything that you will see when you have a pattern. Typically with a pattern, you will have written instructions that are literally written out row by row, and you may also have a chart that comes with the pattern. If you do happen to have a chart, that's perfect, because going forward, you'll be able to understand and hopefully use that chart as opposed to written instructions. The first thing I want to talk about are these numbers right here that are on the right side of the chart. They're numbered 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. And if you notice, they skip an entire row. And the reason for that is on the left side of the chart, there are your even rows. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. The reason for that is charts are meant to be read serpentine. You always start here on the right. You always begin your first row, which subsequently will be your right side row, reading your chart from right to left. When you get to the end of your stitches, you turn your work. Now you are on row 2, knitting back towards the beginning, or the tail, I'll show you that, and you begin reading the chart in this direction from left to right. And this is considered the wrong side. Anytime you're on an even numbered row, you are on the right side of your work. Anytime you are on an even numbered row in which you are reading the chart in the opposite direction, you are on the wrong side of your work. You're always knitting from right to left. When you go down the needle, you always start at the right or at the top and knit towards your hand. You always knit from right to left, but when it comes to a chart, depending on which side of the chart that you are reading, that determines which direction you are reading the chart, whether from right to left or left to right. That's one of the really cool things about a chart, because it allows you to have only one chart rather than two separate charts, one chart for your right side, one chart for your wrong side. Everything is incorporated together all in one, and that's one of the beautiful things about a chart. We've talked about these right here, which are your rows. The next thing I want to talk about is this bottom right here. I've labeled this chart stitches down here along the x-axis, and then along this axis or the y-axis it's labeled rows. These numbers here literally signify a stitch. If I am right here in my work on my needle, I am literally on stitch 5. Each box that you see here is an actual stitch in your knitting. Most of the time stitches look like this in a V formation. That is actually representative of that. So every time you see a box, that is literally one stitch, etc. These first three boxes here, kind of extending upwards, they are in a dotted line or a kind of a dashed line if you notice. The reason for that is they aren't actual stitches. I put them on here to help you line up your rows with your stitches when reading your chart. They are not actually on a patterned chart. I just put them here for visual purposes only. These arrows that you see, again, are visuals indicating that you should be reading this chart from right to left. Conversely, on the left side, when you see arrows pointed in this direction, that is to signify or as a reminder that you should be reading your chart from left to right. I've also put those same direction indicators underneath these column headers. I'll talk more about these in a moment. Below, you see in gray, you've got a +1, +1, +1 to the right of the 1, and then to the left of the 12, you have a +1, +1, +1. Again in gray. Those aren't actually in a pattern. I did put them here to help you when we get to this that's going on here. This is stepping out, because normally when we knit in a column when we do flat knitting. There are times, however, when we have to do stitch increases, in other words, put additional stitches onto the needle to allow for more work to be built up. And that's exactly what this particular pattern is. I've incorporated some increased stitches. I'll talk more about those in a moment. We're starting with 12 stitches. That's how many stitches we're going to be doing for this little swatch. When we get to row 7 has an additional stitch on each side that kind of juts out from the side. Anytime you see a box that juts out from your normal column of knitting, you are to add one on each side. Typically when we do stitch increases, we do make them symmetrically, and not all the time. You may actually be doing them only on one side, but for this demonstration, I did put stitch increases that happen to be symmetric. That's why the stitches poke out on each side. Again, anytime you see a stitch poke out, that is to add one here and add one here, which means if we started off with 12, starting here, we now have 14 stitches on our needle, as we do here. Now, in row 9, it juts out again. That means, again, you're going to add another stitch on either side. If we had 14 here, and then we jut out again, that's one stitch on each side, +1, +1, to the 14, now we have 16 stitches. When we get up to row 11, we do the same thing via a stitch increase on each side, subsequently adding a stitch on each side, giving us a total of 18 stitches on our needle at the end of the swatch. We'll begin with 12 and then we will end with 18 by adding 3 stitches on each side. 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 12 is 18. But we will check that when we actually do this, so I can show that to you. The next thing I want to talk about with regard to patterns, and specifically charts, is the key. A key is here to tell you what symbols in a chart represent, what they mean. Accompanying a key is always an abbreviation. A lot of times in a key we use single letters for a particular stitch, or the name of a stitch I should say, and then we have all of these quirky little things that in essence is shorthand for knitting. If you don't know what they mean, check out the abbreviations that accompany the pattern and they will tell you what they mean. If they don't, if you in the rare instance come across a stitch that is labeled in the key in which there's no abbreviation for it, contact the designer of that pattern to inquire. They should be able to tell you what that means if by mistake, for example, they left it off of the abbreviations. For this particular chart, this first one up here I added, and that's just a reminder that these dotted boxes that you see here represent no stitch. When you encounter a box that's empty, for example, this one or this one or this one, those have two meanings to them. And again, this is the great thing about charts. It's all in one. If I happen to be on the right side of my work and I encounter a blank box, such as when I'm in an odd row, like let's say 9, that means K on RS, P on WS. And that stands for knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. Again, this symbol has two meanings in one. So rather than have two separate charts with two separate symbols, one for knitting, one for purling, it's all in one. And by stipulating by which side of the work that you're on, what to do specifically when you encounter that, that's what makes charts so great. The next symbol that you will see boxes that have a black dot in the center. And again, this has two meanings. So if you happen to be on the right side of your work, such as in row 2 is actually a wrong side row. What that means is while you're on the wrong side, you must knit. If you happen to encounter this when you are on the right side of your work, which this chart here never has an occurrence of that, all of these dots occur in even numbered rows, so you'll never encounter a black dot square while you are in a right side row. But if you did, you would have to purl, because if you encounter this same symbol on the right side of your work as you're reading your chart, that means you have to purl in that instance. But we won't actually see that in this situation. Now we will be doing purl stitches. Purl stitches will happen because if you notice up here, you have empty boxes for right side rows as well as wrong side rows. Because of that, you'll get to flip the terminology of what you're doing. You're either knitting or purling, but we'll do that and I'll show you that when we get to that part. The next symbol that you will see is this symbol here. It kind of looks like the letter Q, like a lowercase q that's leaning back. This is a symbol for M1R. It's an increase stitch and it means make one right. There are, I believe, 4 different types of stitch increases. We're going to be doing 2 of them today, but there's also the M1T, which is make one towards, and the M1B, which is make one back. What we are doing when we're making one is we're essentially putting a twist into the stitch. Now, we could be putting a twist into the stitch that is from our working yarn, or as in this case, we will be putting a twist into the bar that is in between 2 stitches from a prior row. And then putting that in a twist is what creates this figure. When we make one right, what we're doing is we are making a stitch where the left leg of the stitch is front and center. The right side of the stitch is off in the back. And of course, we're viewing from the right side of our work. So when you're viewing such a stitch from the right side of the work, it appears that the stitch has a slant. Normally stitches run up and down straight like this, but when you do a make one right, you are kind of slanting it like this. And again, that left leg is the one that is on top, and therefore it is the one that is seen on the right side of your work. It gives it a right slanting or right leaning appearance. And the reason I decided to do that is if you notice my increases, my step outs, they step towards the right. For aesthetic purposes, I want my stitches to lean in that direction. Now on the other side, we have this symbol, which looks like the letter P that's tipped backwards. Anytime you have an M1R, you usually have an M1L, again, for symmetry purposes. And as you can see, this step out is leaning towards the left, the entire piece of knitting, and therefore any stitch increases that we do, we want that leg that's on top and seen, which happens to be the right leg, that will be leaning to the left. The portion of the leg that we want to see is always going to be the one on top. The one that's in the back can't really be seen because it's on the wrong side of the work. We're ready to begin. Now, anytime you receive a pattern, you have written instructions as well as a chart or a pattern that goes with it. And you as the knitter have the option on which one to use. I've used both in the past, and I typically prefer a chart because it's so compact and I can literally, if it's just a page, I can take it with me, or if it's on my tablet, I can just view the chart and work directly from the chart, and I don't have to fiddle around looking for a particular row that I'm on in the written form. For this, I am going to be doing the long tail cast on. I begin by just putting a loop onto my knitting needle, and I am casting on a total of 12 stitches. All right, 12 cast on stitches. Now this does not count as row 1, and you will see that in written instructions as well. For example, they will say cast on 12 stitches. After that, it begins row 1, colon, and then it tells you how to knit. At this point, if you notice, my tail and my working yarn are on the same end, so this is always going to be our starting point when they are together. If they are apart, you've already begun working away from the tail, and it's kind of a 1-2 process. Anytime you knit away from the tail, you are knitting a right side row. Anytime you knit towards the tail, you are knitting a wrong side row. We will now begin with row 1. Now you should see an overlay of the pattern, and row 1 should be highlighted green, and the indicator that is right below the RS, kind of in the right tip of the pattern, there's an arrow that's pointed in this direction. That should be highlighted green as well, indicating that we will be reading the chart from right to left. The first box is an empty box, as are the next 11 boxes from that. So we are knitting a total of 12 stitches. The symbol is the empty box. The symbol in the key says knit on right side, purl on wrong side. As we are on the right side of our work, we will be knitting all 12 of these stitches. That's row 1 finished. Now we will turn our work to begin row 2. So now the chart should show row 2 highlighted blue, and the arrow indicator that is below the WS in the upper left, that also should be highlighted blue. It is in this direction, indicating that when we read the chart, we are now reading from left to right. We're still knitting the same in the same direction. We always knit in the same direction, but when we read charts, we read them in opposite directions depending upon which side of the work that we are on, in this case the wrong side. The first box, as are the other 11 boxes, have dots in the center of them. According to the key, a box with a dot says purl on right side, knit on wrong side. As we are on the wrong side, we will be knitting all 12 of these stitches. Row 2 is finished. Again, our working yarn is back with our tail, meaning we've done 1-1-2 pass. You always go away from your tail and then you come back to your tail. We turn our work, and now we are ready to begin row 3. Row 3 should be highlighted green, and the indicator that is below the RS in the upper right, that should be highlighted green as well. We will be reading our chart from right to left for this particular right side row. All of the boxes in this row are empty boxes, and according to the key, empty box says knit on right side, purl on wrong side. As we are on the right side of our work, we are knitting all 12 of these stitches. finishes row 3. Now we turn our work and we are going to begin row 4. Row 4 is now highlighted blue. The direction indicator is also highlighted blue. This row will be reading the chart from left to right. All of these boxes that appear in row number 4 all have black dots in them. According to the key, box with a black dot, we are to purl if we are on the right side, knit if we are on the wrong side. We are on the wrong side of our work and we will knit this entire row. Again, the crucial thing is we are reading the chart from left to right. Row 4 is finished. Now we turn our work to begin row 5. Row 5 in the chart should be highlighted green, and the direction indicator below the RS should also be highlighted green. We are reading the chart from right to left. The first box and all of the subsequent boxes for this row are empty boxes. And according to the key, a box that is empty means knit on right side, purl on wrong side. We are on a right side row. Again, it's an odd numbered row. We will be knitting all 12 of these. That completes row 5. Now we turn our work to begin row 6, and that row should now be highlighted blue in the visual, and the direction indicator that is pointed in this direction is also blue. We will be reading this row from left to right. The first box and all of the other boxes have black dots in them, and according to the key, black dot says purl on right side, knit on wrong side. As we are on the wrong side, as this is an even numbered row, we will be knitting the entire row. That completes row 6. I wanted to pause for a moment before we move on to row 7. If you haven't recognized, we are actually knitting garter stitch. Garter stitch is where you knit on both sides of the work, both the wrong side as well as the right side. I wanted to take a little bit of time to go over how you determine how many rows of stitches you have knitted when you are knitting garter. It's sometimes hard to tell because both sides can look the same because both sides have what's referred to as garter ridges. The way that we count how many rows of garter stitch we've done is by simply counting the number of garter ridges we see in front of us. This first part right here, the stitches that you see, that's not a garter ridge. That's actually your cast on row. That is not to be counted when we do this method. Counting ridges on this side, we've got 1, 2, 3. That is a ridge. You always count the ridge that's touching the needle. We flipped our work over. So we ended with 3, so now we count these garter ridges. 4, 5, 6. Again, this that's touching the needle, that is actually considered a garter ridge. So that's 6 garter ridges, which means we've done 6 rows of knitting. Again, we did not count this bottom right here. This was the cast on row that we did. So I just wanted to take a few moments to address how to count garter ridges, since that's what we've actually been knitting. Now is where the fun begins. We're on row number 7. Again, this is a right side row. The row should be highlighted green, as well as the indicator reminding us to read the chart from right to left. The first 2 stitches in this row are empty boxes. The key says for an empty box, you are to knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. We are on the right side, so the first 2 stitches, the chart, we will knit. So that's 1, 2. Okay, so the next symbol that we see, this is our first new symbol, encountered in our chart. It looks like that Q that's kind of tipped back to the right. That symbol is actually M1R, which stands for make one right. The way that we do a make one right, or make one left for that matter, but I'll show you when we do the make one left, is you pull your work apart and you're looking for that topmost bar that connects this last stitch on your right needle and this last stitch here on the left needle. So that there's a bar that actually joins those two stitches. So this bar right here that's under my thumbnail, that's the bar that we're interested in. To make one right, you take your left needle, the tip of it, and you gently go behind your work and come in from behind, up, and scoop up that bar and lift it up onto the left needle. Okay, I'll show that to you again. So first, identify the bar that's on the very top of your work in between the two stitches, because we are actually going to create an additional stitch in between these two stitches. So identify that bar first, make sure you're focused on that one, and then you take the tip of your left needle and from behind you come under and pick it up, lift it up onto your left needle. And then what we do is we knit like we normally would, so from left to right, inserting the needle from left to right. And that's traditionally referred to as knitting through the front. Now I'm going to zoom in, or try to zoom in, and if you notice that stitch literally resembles the symbol on our chart and in the key. So you see how the left leg is in front, it's facing or laying on the right side of your work, and it's leaning to the right. And then the other leg is behind. So there's the right leg. And it's kind of tucking itself around the stitch and behind your work. Okay, so the next 8 stitches, or the next 8 boxes on the chart, those are empty boxes, and that means knit on right side, purl on wrong side. Or on the right side, we will knit those 8 stitches. Alright, so now we're at this other symbol. This is the first time we've seen this symbol. Now I wanted to pause for a moment. If you notice on your left stitch, or I'm sorry, on your left needle, you have 2 stitches remaining. However, according to your chart, you have 3 boxes remaining. So how do you reconcile the fact that a chart has 1 more stitch on it than what you are showing on your needle? That has to do with the fact that we are getting ready to make that 3rd stitch that we are looking for in our work. So that's the symbol that leans backwards. Looks like a P, the letter P tipped backwards. That symbol is make one left. And that leaning, or that slanting, is towards the left, and that's why it's an M1L. So this time, again, we're going to look for the bar, the topmost bar, which is right there. This time, instead of taking our needle and going in from behind, we're going to take the tip of our left needle and come in towards you and then pick up that bar and lift it up onto the needle. I'll show that to you again. Again, identify that topmost bar. Take your left needle, take the tip and bring it towards you, down and under, and scoop up that bar, or lift that bar up onto your left needle. Now this time when we go to knit this additional stitch, we have to knit through the back loop. If you knit normally, if you try to knit it this way, you're going to have a huge gaping hole in your work. Conversely, when you do the M1R, if you try to knit through the back loop on that one, again, you would have a gaping hole in your work. So it's always important to remember M1R is normal knitting, M1L is we knit through the back loop. And if you notice this stitch, I'll try to zoom in. Notice how it resembles that P, that little letter P that's tipped backwards. So the right side, the right leg of your stitch is leaning to the left. And then the left leg is twisted behind it. Because that's all this is. If you just look at it and imagine, it's just a stitch that has been twisted to the left. And on this side, this was just a stitch that was twisted to the right. Either way, it's a twisted stitch. The direction, left or right, is literally in relation to the direction that you're twisting this stitch. And in this case, we have twisted this stitch clockwise, if you will, and created a left-leaning loop as a result. And the last two boxes now are empty boxes. Again, we're on the right side of our work, so we will knit because we're on the right side. That finishes row 7. We turn our work, and now we're on the wrong side and getting ready to knit row 8. Row 8 should be highlighted blue again, and the direction indicator pointing this way is also highlighted blue, which means we are reading this particular row on the chart from left to right. The first two stitches have dots in them. The key says purl on right side, knit on wrong side. Again, we're on the wrong side, so we will be knitting these first two stitches. Now, the next 10 boxes are empty boxes. And so the key says, for an empty box, you want to knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. As we are on the wrong side, we're going to bring our working yarn forward and we will purl those next 10 stitches. Okay, so that was 10. The last two boxes have dots in them, and the key says purl on right side, knit on wrong side. Again, we're on the wrong side. So those last two stitches we will knit. And that finishes row 8. So we turn our work. And now we are ready to begin row 9. Row 9 should be green now, and the indicator that's pointed from right to left, or to the left, that is highlighted green, meaning that we are reading our chart from right to left. The first two boxes in the chart are empty boxes. Those say knit on right side, purl on wrong side. So we are on the right side, we will knit those two. The third box in has a symbol for M1R. Again, we're going to be doing a stitch increase, and it will be leaning to the right, or a right slanting stitch increase. Again, we look for that topmost bar, which is right there. We take the tip of our left needle, bring it behind our work, and then come in and lift that bar up onto the left needle. So again, locate the bar. It's on the very top. Take the tip of your left needle, come in from behind, and bring it up and onto the left needle. Now, if I try to knit from right to left, or through the back loop, it's going to leave a huge hole. So we want to knit normally, which is from left to right, as we typically do. And that will secure that twist with a loop of yarn or a stitch in essence. There's our right leaning increase. Okay, the next 10 boxes are empty, which means since we're on the right side of our work, we will be knitting all 10. Okay, so that was 10, and we are at the box that has the symbol for M1L, which is make one left. Again, we're going to locate that top bar. It's very easy to see. There it is right there. We're going to take the tip of our left needle, bring it forward towards us, and then pick that up. Pick that bar and lift it up onto the left needle. I'll show that to you again. Locate the bar, have it in your sights, take the tip of your left needle, bring it forward, lift it up onto the left needle. This time we will be knitting through the back loop in order to keep that twist maintained in that new stitch we've created. And that twist has the stitch leaning to the left, hence the name M1L, make one left. The last 2 boxes are empty boxes. As we are on the right side of our work, the key calls for us to knit those last 2. That finishes row 9. We turn our work and we are ready to begin row 10. Row 10 should be highlighted blue, and the direction indicator pointing in the right direction, that's highlighted blue as well. We will be reading the chart from left to right. The first 2 boxes have black dots in them. According to the key, because we are on the wrong side of our work, we are to knit those first 2 stitches. The next boxes, or the next stitches, those are empty boxes. According to the key, an empty box, we are to knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. We are on the wrong side of our work, so we will be purling all 12 of these stitches. Okay, 12 purled stitches. The last 2 boxes in row 10 have dots in them, which means as we are on the wrong side, we will knit those last 2 stitches according to the key. That is the end of row 10. Now we turn our work and we are ready to begin row 11. We're on the right side of our work now. At this point, you can start to better see and distinguish the right side from the wrong side because we've begun incorporating stockinette stitch. Stockinette stitch is where you knit on the right side but purl on the wrong side. So at this point, it's very easy to discern when you lay your work down and you come to pick it up. You can definitely tell, oh, this is the right side because it's the prettier side. It's the side that we want to display. With row 11, the first 2 boxes are empty. We're on the right side of our work, so the key tells us that those 2 stitches must be knitted. The next box is a symbol for M1R. We're doing another stitch increase. Again, locate that bar that's at the very top, close to your needles. You take the tip of your left needle and from behind, come in and pick up that bar. I'll show that to you again. So locate the bar, take the tip of your left needle and from behind, lift up that stitch. And we will be knitting through the front loop or through the front from left to right. Okay. Now the next 12 stitches are going to be empty boxes. According to the key, we knit when we're on the right side, purl on the wrong side. Since we're on the right side, we will knit all 12 of those stitches. All right, now we're at the symbol for the M1L. So we're going to be doing another stitch increase that is left leaning. So again, we take the tip of our left needle, come forward, down under, and lift up that top bar. Bring it up onto the left needle. And because this is a left leaning make one, we will be knitting through the back loop. And then the last two boxes are empty boxes. We're on the right side of our work. We will knit those two. All right, so that is row 11 finished. We turn our work. We're on the final wrong side row, row number 12. It should be highlighted blue, and the indicator below the WS should be highlighted blue, pointed in the right direction. So we will be reading the chart from left to right. The first two stitches, or the first two boxes, have black dots in them, and according to the key, because we are on the wrong side of our work, we must knit those first two. All right, now the next 14 boxes are empty squares. And according to the key, because we are on the wrong side of our work, and that's an empty box symbol, we have to purl those 14 stitches. So we'll bring our yarn forward and purl those. Okay, that was 14. Now the last two boxes have black dots in them, meaning that because we are on the wrong side of our work, we must knit those last two stitches. Okay, so that concludes the swatch. So let's take a look at what we've done. And actually I'll bring the chart in along. So here's our swatch here. Now, at first glance, if you notice, this is starting to resemble your work. Your chart is made and symboled in such a way to give as close or as accurate a depiction of what it is you will be knitting. And that's one of the nice things, and one of the things I really appreciate about charts, that before I knew how to use them, I didn't fully appreciate and grasp. If you notice, these kind of resemble garter rows or garter ridges, and that's exactly what we have going on here. We've got three of them. So 1, 2, 3 garter ridges, 1, 2, 3 garter ridges. And now at this point, our work starts to kind of fan out on each side, or flare out on each side. That's exactly what's going on. Now, if you notice, we did continue the garter ridges just on 2 of the stitches going up in each direction. And you can clearly see that in your work. You've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We always count the one that's up on the needle. And then you have these nice stitch increases that we've done, and they happen to be leaning in the direction for which the knitting is shooting off towards. For example, this first one here, you can see, is a right leaning. So there's one, here's one, and here's one. And similarly, or symmetrically, on the other side, you have the same thing. So you've got your 3 stitch increases. So here's one here that's leaning to the left. Here's one here that's leaning to the left. And then finally, here's one here that's leaning to the left. That is the first part of the charts workshop. This was the beginner's one. If you did like this video, please do give it a like. I appreciate that. And if you did find it helpful, if you want to move on to the second video in this workshop that goes over more advanced features. For example, you can actually incorporate repeats, both vertical repeats as well as horizontal repeats, in a simple chart. I'll go into more of that in that particular one. In the meantime, Thank you for watching. I always appreciate it. I do appreciate your feedback and comments too. I do respond to all of them, so please feel free to provide any that you want. And again, thank you for watching and happy knitting.